Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Grace. It is good to be with you on this day. If you're with us in the sanctuary or online, thank you for joining us and being with us. My name is Nate Nims, if we haven't met yet, and it's good to be with you today. In their bulletin, which is also available online at gracedesmoines.org, you can read about some things that are coming up and going on around the church, but just a couple things to highlight. Our next Wednesday night game night is on this upcoming Wednesday on the 25th, and so we'll have games and puzzles and crafts for kids to do and snacks and popcorn and all that fun stuff. But one little extra special thing that we're going to do this week, if you have never learned to play Mahjong, Deb Eyestone has volunteered to teach folks how to play. So if you want to learn a new game and meet some new folks, come to the church on Wednesday night, and you can learn to play Mahjong or play any of the other games that we have available for folks to have that time together. So we hope you'll join us on Wednesday. Then on June 5th, following the service, we're going to do a coffee with the pastor. So if folks are newer to the church and want to learn a bit more or want to learn how to join or any of that kind of stuff, you can have coffee with me, and we'll talk a bit about the church and what's going on and how you can get connected. And on that note of getting connected, later in the service, we're going to highlight some of the ways that folks have volunteered and are making a difference around the church and thank them for their time. And if you see somebody recognized for something that you'd like to be a part of, you can have a face connected with that name. And then Meg, wherever she went, there's Meg. Meg's got an announcement to share on behalf of the SPRC and our preschool committee.
Good morning, Grace. I am Meg Malone-Titus, representing our Staff Parish Relations Committee this morning. Wanted to share, if you have a bulletin that's highlighted, Grace Preschool Transitions has some details. But we want to share that our director of Grace Preschool, Kelly Donnelly, is resigning. Our Grace staff, teachers, students have been blessed to have Kelly's love, dedication, and leadership since 2011. Her last day will be June 3rd. Kelly will be pursuing employment at Drake University, and we do wish her only the best. We are planning a reception to share our gratitude for Kelly following the June 5th, 10:15 service, Fellowship Hall. So we are collecting a love gift. Cash checks designated for Kelly can be given to the church office. And so they have already begun the process to look to hire the new Grace Preschool Director. Thank you.
Yeah, we are very thankful for Kelly and her 11 years as the director of the Grace Preschool. And in the interim, one of our teachers, Ashley Werner, is going to be stepping up as the interim director. And the preschool committee is getting going on advertising and having that position out there. So keep the preschool in your thoughts and prayers this summer. Our plans to have a new director in place hopefully no later than early August, so they're ready to start the fall with the students and teachers. There are some more things that you can read about in the bulletin, but for now, we'll have Kristen lead us in our call to worship.
Please join me in the call to worship, which will appear on the screen. Which commandment in the law is greatest? Love your God. And the second? Love. 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 On these commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Blessed are those whose delight is in the law of our God. Please rise in body or in spirit as we sing from the red hymnal, number 400, Come Thou Fount. join me in the opening prayer, which will be on the screen. Lord of light and hope, be with us this day as we have gathered to hear your word. Help us open our hearts to the commandments to love, even when loving is difficult. Give us the courage to be people who will commit their whole lives in your service. For this, in Jesus' name, amen. Our reading today is from the book of 1 John, chapter 2, verses 3 through 6. This is how we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. The one who claims, I know him, while not keeping his commandments, is a liar. And the truth is not in this person. But the love of God is truly perfected in whoever keeps his word. This is how we know we are in him. The one who claims to remain in him ought to live in the same way as he lived.
Thank you, Kristen. So this morning at Grace, we're continuing in the Summer of Love, going through the letter to 1 John, and it's really a bit more of a sermon that John wrote. Church tradition has said since about the first half of that first century, that this letter of 1 John was written by the same author of the Gospel of John as a means to sort of explain what it means to live out our faith. It's sort of a sermon as a letter to sum up what our lives should look like on the other side of the resurrection. Because if Jesus is alive, if he's not in the tomb, the worst thing can't be the last thing, and we can live from the fullness of the love that God is. As we begin this service, if you think I am okay at preaching, there's a person here that you should thank today, because Mike Metz is here. Mike was the first pastor that I ever worked with 13 years ago in Fairfield when I was an associate pastor that just graduated from seminary. Michael Gukin knows Mike as well because Fairfield First was the church that Michael grew up at. And Mike, as my senior pastor, was very generous to me because we had 3 services a week, and almost every week I got to preach at one of them. So as an associate that just graduated that didn't really know what I was doing, Mike gave me a lot of opportunities and a lot of chances. So thank you, Mike, very much for being with us today. Now, in this letter of 1 John, they write about how we know God, how we know Christ. John writes, this is how we know him, if we keep his commandments. Now, that seems fairly straightforward, but it's a little different. So you can think about it like this. I know that running a marathon means that someone runs 26.2 miles. That is different than saying, I know how to run a marathon. Right? There is knowledge, but then there is knowledge. There's a different sort of knowing that is experiential. So the word that John uses in Greek to talk about knowledge is gonisko. And while it means knowing, it means knowing through firsthand experience. A more sort of accurate way to translate it would be to say learning through experience. It's not even fully knowing, it's learning and developing through that firsthand experience. Now, we don't have to go into full detail, but I find it a little interesting that one of the other times that this word for know is used in the Bible is in the Gospel of Luke. So Mary is told by an angel, you are pregnant. Congratulations. They have that little shower for her. And Mary then says to the angel, a little surprised, how can this be, for I have never known a man? And we'll just leave it at that. Because it's the same word for know in that passage. Now, we're all smart people here. So if I say a word like atmosphere, you are at least going to pretend like you know what we're talking about. Now, to be completely honest, when I started looking up sort of examples of how do we explain this knowledge that is known through experience, I did have to look up a simple definition of atmosphere. And the simplest definition that I found was the oxygen or other gases that are surrounding the planet and held in place by gravity. So now you know what atmosphere is, but how can we go this kind of atmosphere? How can we have an experience of it? So we're going to have a little experience of it. And I'm moving fast, so sorry for the AV folks upstairs that are going to track me, but we'll be moving back to the middle. Now, and if you could, Bob, I can see you up there. Do you want to put what's down here on the camera up there as well, if you can? So, we got a ruler, right? And you can put a ruler on the edge of a table, and if I drop this little ball on it, right, ta-da, right? Like very, very special, right? Like it does not take much for this ball to knock that ruler out of place. But what if you just take one piece of paper, put it over the ruler, right? Like it barely moves, right? Like you see a little bit of a wiggle, but oh, I missed. That one doesn't count, but, right? Like it can hit, it will bounce off the ruler. If I can make it bounce off the ruler again. No. Right? So, now you can ask yourself, like, it's one sheet of paper, so is it the weight of the paper that's holding it in place? So, crumple up the paper, put the paper on one end, right? Like, it's not the weight of the paper. And you should already know the scientific solution to this because I defined atmosphere a few minutes ago, right? Like, there is something to do with atmosphere that is holding this paper in place, that is holding that ruler in place. And to show that, so this is a ball of sticky tack, right? So it holds fairly well. Most of the time, I didn't rehearse this magic trick too much. Now, this same little sticky ball, put it on. I need a volunteer for this one, so you know that I'm not just putting up. Michael, will you come here? Pull up quickly. Yeah, the paper doesn't go up. Now, why do you think the paper doesn't go up? Atmosphere, right? Yes. So there is the gas that is pushing down. Thank you very much, Michael. Right? There's the atmospheric gas that is pushing down, putting weight on the paper. And if you try to pull up quickly, you're creating a vacuum on the underside of the paper that's creating like a suction cup within it. So if you try to lift this quickly, you might, but you probably can't. You have to lift it up very slowly, and then you can get it, right? The atmosphere, we know the definition of it. That is all for that round of the experience, so thank you. So we knew what atmosphere was, but now you sort of saw it and experienced it in another way. There is this experiential knowledge that shifts how you interact with something, how you see something, how you can feel something. So there is this life that we live where we know things, but then we have to really know them. And the same is true of faith. If we want to say we know Jesus, then we have to have this experiential knowledge of Jesus. We have to have that first-hand experience that lets us continue to learn and develop. So during the Last Supper in the Gospel of John, Jesus tells Peter, and Peter is the most caffeinated disciple. Jesus tells Peter, "You will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows." And Peter says, "Absolutely not, Lord, never me." Peter refuses to believe that he would ever deny Jesus. But after Jesus is arrested and taken to trial, Peter goes into hiding because I mean, it's fair to think that Peter is assuming that if they came after Jesus, they're going to come after the folks that were with Jesus next. So Peter is trying to keep his distance, but still see what's going on. So Jesus is on trial before Pilate, and Peter is standing in the background trying not to see, and a young woman goes up to him and says, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" And Peter says back, "No." And then another person comes by and says, "I'm pretty sure I saw you with him." And Peter again says, "No." And then one more person comes up to Peter and says, "You're one of his followers." And Peter denies Jesus a third time, and then the rooster crows. After the resurrection, though, there is this great moment on the beach where Jesus and Peter and Thomas and a few of the other disciples have this fishing trip together. If you ever skip church on a Sunday morning to go fishing, don't feel bad because you're just being biblical. Right? Like there is precedent for going on a Sunday fishing trip. So next weekend, holiday weekend, do what you need to do. So in John 21, there is this story of the disciples fishing. And that was their day job. They were going to work, but they weren't catching anything. So they're fishing off one of the sides of the boat, and their nets are coming in empty. And Jesus is walking along the shoreline, and they can't recognize him. So Jesus asks from the shore, "Have you caught anything yet?" And the disciples say, "No, it's not been our best day." So Jesus says, throw your nets to the other side and see what happens. And they're fishing, they're enjoying their time, so why not? So they throw their net to the other side of the boat, and John writes that they catch more fish than they could pull in, that they caught 153 fish in their nets. And then it's in that moment that they recognize Jesus standing on the shoreline. And it's one of those funny and odd details where you wonder if John got Peter's permission to write this, because it's written, at least I think the Bible's funny. Hopefully you do too. It's written that Peter was fishing naked in the boat and just jumps into the water and starts swimming to shore. So if you ever go streaking, that also has biblical precedent. Right, like those details, you really wonder, like, did John ask Peter's permission to include that? Or did John say, like, at least I was wearing a tunic? Anyway, all the disciples make it to the shore, and Jesus invites them to have breakfast on the beach together. So they have brunch on the beach on that Sunday morning. So if you ever have brunch on a Sunday morning instead of coming to church, again, there is biblical precedent for that. So the meal is over. Jesus is having this time with the disciples, and Jesus then asks Peter, right after they're done with their brunch, "Do you love me?" And Peter says back, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And then Jesus says to Peter, "Feed my lambs." 3 times Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And 3 times Peter says back, "Yes, you know I love you." And so 3 times Jesus says back to Peter, "Feed my sheep." So there's a lot going on in this passage, but one of the biggest things is that Peter gets a chance to make things right. Peter has this moment of sort of reconciliation and redemption where the wrongs that he had done can be amended. And more than that, for the life of the church, it's as if Peter is being told by Jesus, the church's job is not just to catch people. You have to take care of them. You have to feed them. You have to nourish them. You have to provide for them. Jesus wants Peter and the disciples to care for the good shepherd's sheep. So imagine that we're all on a fishing trip someday and the sun is out, there's a nice warm breeze, we are enjoying brunch on a beautiful sunny day. It wouldn't matter if we caught any fish because we're enjoying our time together and it's beautiful out. On a day like that, when you are with family and friends, when you are doing something that reminds you how beautiful this world is, on moments like that, it is really easy to see the sacredness, to feel the holiness, to say, I can sense God in this moment. Anyone can find God at the top of a mountaintop. But when someone cuts you off in traffic, do you see God in that person? If you are sitting at the drive-thru of a Starbucks and you have ordered a iced cold brew coffee, no cream, no sugar, it is the easiest thing for the staff to make for you. If you are sitting in the drive-thru and you know all they have to do is pour cold coffee on top of ice and give it to you, but then the car in front of you ordered a custom Frappuccino, and then on top of that ordered a half-calf venti 4-pump sugar-free cinnamon dulce de leche skinny latte at 120 degrees. You're thinking to yourself, I just want my coffee. Are you going to see God in that person and in that moment? To experience and to know God through Jesus Christ it's not as simple as those mountaintop experiences or those moments where you see a sunrise and it feels like, oh, this was created for me. To know God through Christ is to know God through following Christ's commandments, by trying to live the same life that he lived, by feeding his sheep and taking care of one another. So I think that's why in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable about sheep and goats. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable that it gives us a lot of pause because it's a parable about divine judgment. And in this parable, Jesus says there will come a day where a king says to us all, or at least to those on the right, come and inherit the kingdom. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing to wear. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And in this parable, Jesus says that the folks on the right that are told, you are inheriting the kingdom, they're confused, and they say back to the king, they say to Jesus, when did we see you hungry or thirsty? When were you ever a stranger to us? And the king says back to the people, I assure you that when you did this for the least of these, you did it to me. But then the king turns to the folks on the left and says, when I was hungry, you didn't do anything to feed me. When I was thirsty, you made sure my water was turned off. When I was sick, my insurance premiums went up. I had a pre-existing condition and I couldn't get coverage. And not only that, nobody gave me a can of chicken noodle soup to make me feel a little better. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. And when I was in prison, you thought to yourself, well, they must have done something to deserve it, so whatever happens to them on the inside is their fault anyway. And in this parable, those folks to Jesus' left, they're confused too, and they ask the king, they ask Jesus, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty, or when were you a stranger or in prison? And the king says, whatever you haven't done to the least of these, you have not done to me. So the next time you see somebody with a cardboard sign on the side of the road asking for change, what kind of change do you think they really need? And then maybe instead of seeing them hold a cardboard sign, what if you could imagine they were holding up a mirror? Because if we can't, at the very least, see ourselves in them, and if we can't at least give that person the dignity of eye contact, then we will never be able to see God in them or in one another. In the Gospel of John, Jesus sums up his commandment saying, I give you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. Last night we had a wedding here at Grace, and we talked a lot about love. And it was the kind of wedding where everything happened to make it memorable, because the ring bearers, who were both just under 2, started racing one another down the aisle. And then the younger of the ring bearer started to lose the race clearly about halfway down the aisle. So they threw a tantrum and then ran back the other way, kicking and screaming. And then a couple friends of the family came up to do a reading, and there was a large bouquet of flowers right here, and the bride's wedding train draped all the way down here. So the folks that were doing the reading kind of tripped over the bride's dress and then almost knocked over the flowers. And then after that, somebody in the congregation, their cell phone started to ring. And then it rang again, and then it rang again. And then it got louder because this person pulled their phone out of their pocket to look at it ringing, as if looking at it would make it stop. And then it kept ringing until they put it back in their pocket as it continued to ring. And then, at the end, after I said a few words to the couple and we went to sign the wedding license, as you can tell, the railings are gone from up here. We're having some carpet installed in a couple weeks. So the railings were out, but I told myself before the ceremony, if I was getting married, I wouldn't want those bald spots in my pictures. So we put the railings back up for the ceremony, and I told the wedding party, don't touch them. One of the groomsmen, standing right here, fainted backwards. Yeah. Thankfully, the groom is a physician's assistant, and the congregation was filled of doctors and nurses, so he was taken care of very quickly. And then when he finally stood up, everyone gave him a round of applause. So it was a very, very memorable wedding ceremony. But one thing that went great for me is that the couple didn't ask us to read 1 Corinthians 13. That was a miracle. Because if you have been to a church wedding, there is a good chance that you have heard someone read, love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way, but insists on service. Love endures, love hopes all things, believes all things, trusts all things. Love never fails. Faith, hope, and love remain, and the greatest of these is love. We want that passage to be romantic. We want to imagine that Paul is writing in 1 Corinthians 13, love is rose petals in a bathtub. Love is a candlelit dinner for two. Love is a romantic novel with Fabio on the cover. But the first thing that Paul writes about love is patient. What's romantic about being patient? Being patient means you are waiting for something, and maybe you could say anticipation is romantic, but who wants to be patient? Like, is that really your goal when you are waiting for something? Love is not always easy. Love takes dedication, love takes devotion, love takes sacrifice, love takes humility. And so when Jesus gives us this new commandment and tells us what it looks like to love one another, it's right after he washed the disciples' feet. So in the ancient world, people walked on the same paths as all of their animals, and if folks wore a sandal, it was a thin leather strap sort of tied to their foot, so just the bottom of it was covered. So people's feet would be filthy after walking anywhere in the ancient world. So when you entered someone's house, it was typical for there to be a bowl of water by the front door, and if that household had the youngest child or a lowly servant or slave, that person would be responsible for washing everyone's feet as they came in. So whatever you stepped through, you wouldn't be bringing into the house. It was not a fun job. It wasn't like getting a pedicure. It was dirty and not distinguished in any way. But Jesus, after the meal, meaning that none of the disciples took the time to wash their own feet when they entered that house, Jesus washes their feet. Jesus cleanses them and takes on this role of humble service. So knowing that they would all abandon him, Jesus washes their feet. While Jesus knows that Peter will deny him, Jesus washes his feet. Knowing that Judas is going to betray him, Jesus washes his feet and says to the disciples, "This is how everyone will know that you are one of my disciples, when you love one another." When you love like this, with humble and sacrificial service, when you put others before yourself, when you are patient or kind, when you are not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude, when you hope all things, endure all things, believe all things, and live with a love that doesn't fail, that's how you will know that you are my disciples. It's that simple, and it is that difficult for us. So John writes, if this is how we know him, if we keep his commandments. And then John goes on to write, the one who claims I know him while not keeping his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. Now, I can think of a few times this week where I could call myself a liar by what John says. Because there are some folks in my life and in this world where if they were hungry or thirsty or naked or sick or in prison, I would just say, there's nothing I can do, best of luck. There's a bit of a difficult rub with this passage because we can read it in a way that says we have to do everything for everyone. And that's honestly most of the time how I read this passage. Because as followers of Jesus, we have to support one another and care for one another. We don't have the luxury of saying we are not responsible for each other. But at the very same time, if we are always pouring love into the world and we are ourselves running on empty, we are going to be empty as well. So let's imagine a purely hypothetical pastor. It could be a pastor of any church, definitely not me, a purely hypothetical, imaginary pastor. This is all a parable. So imagine that there's this pastor working at a church where they had 3 weeks in a row plus a few days where they didn't have any time off. And so they were doing a lot of work. And definitely this never happens at Grace. Again, purely hypothetical. But imagine that there was a pastor that was working 23 days in a row without a day off. And as they were getting ready for a Sunday, knowing that their day off would be the next Monday, they thought to themselves, in this purely hypothetical church, of course, it's senior Sunday, so kids are going to spend a lot of time talking, so I don't have to talk that much. So you could imagine that this hypothetical pastor in this parable that we're making up would tell themselves, clearly I don't have to write much of a sermon, so I can just write a few notes and call it good because I'm going to take a break soon. And then imagine that this hypothetical pastor in this imaginary parable talks to the kids, finds out how much they're going to say, and then has a bit of an internal panic attack because they know how much time they have to fill. So this imaginary and hypothetical pastor has a few notes to make up a sermon, but doesn't really know what to say. So in this hypothetical sermon that was said last week, they end up going on a weird rant about ear hair. They make a joke about Ed Gein, and then they spend most of their time talking about how they were trapped under an inflatable movie screen. Because that's the word of God for this week. Clearly hypothetical. No pastor would ever find themselves in that situation. But in the context of this reading for 1 John, it did let me see things a little differently. Because when John writes that this person is a liar, when John writes that if you claim to know Jesus but are you not following his commandments, the one who claims him saying, I know him while not making his commandments is a liar, that word for liar is pasutes. And pasutes more accurately means misleading. It's not a bold-faced lie, it's just sort of like tilting the truth. It would be like if I said this carpet is a light blue, but said it was light blue because compared to navy, it is. Or like if you're misleading or just not saying the full truth about something. So as a pastor, I was a bit misleading last week because I was always prepared. I'm an Eagle Scout, right? That's the motto, be prepared. Wasn't. I was pasutes last week. And now I can say, wasn't that a great example for the sermon this week? Right? It's always connected, even when it's not. So how do you present yourself to the world? How are you living out your faith? Is it honest, or is it just a bit misleading? Is it living into the fullness of your life, or are you sort of making amends here and there to present yourself in another way? So I don't think John says that we are liars or we are being misleading to make us feel worse about yourself. I don't think John is giving us sort of another whip that we can beat ourselves with, because no one can make us feel worse than ourselves. We all have those sort of tapes that play on repeat in the back of our heads that make us feel what we feel and make us feel terrible. John isn't writing us to beat us down. John is lifting us up, which is why after this, John goes on to write, "The love of God is truly perfected in whoever keeps his word. This is how we know we are in him. The one who claims to remain in him ought to live the same way that he lived." Now, perfected in this passage, it doesn't mean that we are perfect. It means we are practicing. It means we are growing. It means we are developing. To be perfected means that we are ongoing. To be perfected is kind of to see ourselves like a ruler under a piece of paper. There is this thing, this grace of God, this love of Christ that is surrounding us. And we might get bounced around every now and then, but whatever hits us, we are going to stay in place. There is an atmosphere of God's love that will never let us go. So we, like Saint Teresa years and years ago, can say, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Because the atmosphere that we are under is God's grace and love, and it is continuing to perfect us because we are learning and experiencing this love every day that we seek to live with it. In the early church, around the 3rd century, St. Augustine summed up this teaching saying, "Love and do what you will." Augustine is not saying anything goes. Augustine is saying if your will, if your desire, if your life is defined by love, then love, and do what you will with that love. So how will you do that this week? How will you live out the love of God in the same way that Jesus lived? How can you wash someone's feet? How can you welcome a stranger? If someone is hungry, what can you do to feed them? If you can remember that God's grace is with you and surrounding you, how can you share that peace with others? And also, if you need to remember, when asked the question, what would Jesus do? Flipping a table is a valid response. Right? If you need to overturn a table in love, do it. And if you need to relax, if you need to have breakfast on the beach, if you need to go fishing, that is a perfectly biblical response to the question, what would Jesus do, as well? Because there are a lot of ways that we can live out the way that Jesus lived. There are a lot of ways that we can tell us that we need to do and achieve more. But at the very same time, what we need to remember and what we too often forget is that Jesus accepted a lot of love that came his way too. There was a woman that washed Jesus' feet and anointed them with perfume. And others told Jesus, "How dare you accept this gift?" And Jesus responds by saying, "How could I not?" Or then there was Zacchaeus, who invited Jesus over to his house for a dinner party. So Jesus, of course, showed up. There was all the care that Mary and Martha gave to Jesus that he received. Living like Jesus did, it doesn't mean we always give. It doesn't mean we always contribute. It means that we live in this pattern where humanity and divinity are found in the giving and sharing of love. So if you feel like the least of these, if you feel like a stranger in your own life, remember that it is Jesus who says, "We will take care of one another." That as others take care of you, it is as if Christ is taking care of you. So can you empower someone to say, this is how I need you? Can you live that honestly and not be misleading in your life this week? So how will you receive the grace that is already yours? Because God is the atmosphere and this love is all around us. So may you feel it surround you. As the love of God is perfected in us in this practice of giving love and receiving it as well. So may you remind yourself this week and those around you that we are seeking this pattern of giving and receiving love in the same way that Jesus did. And as we do, we know that Christ is in us. We'll come to a time of prayer together now, and as we pray, there's a few folks that have funerals coming up. So this next Friday, we'll have a service for Mary Ennis, and then a couple weeks after that, we'll have a service for Helen Young, and then a week after that, we'll have a service for Ione Shattuck. There's a few folks with prayers listed in the bulletin, and then we also want to lift up the Turnquists and their son Al and his ongoing recovery, so prayers with you both. And some of you may have seen what my dad posted online this week, and if you didn't, that's okay. But my dad, Gary, my parents are in South Dakota celebrating with my mom's in-laws, but my dad has Parkinson's and has begun his physical therapy with that, so I'd appreciate prayers with my parents. If there are prayers that folks have online, you can put those in the chat. And for everyone here in the sanctuary, if you have prayers that you want us to add to our prayer list, in your bulletin, there's a little connection card with a comment space. You can put your prayers there, and we'll be in prayer with you. But let us pray now. God, thank you for your atmosphere of grace that is always around us. Sometimes we are so used to its presence that we can forget that it's there, just like we can miss the air that is all around us in this time. But your love, your grace, your presence is never far from us. We are always in it and under it. So remind us this day and in all our days to come that your grace will never let us go. And with your love, we can truly live into the fullness of our lives, seeking to follow the commandments of Christ. God, for all the ways that we have been misleading in that, for all the ways that we have done things to others that we shouldn't, or the ways that we have left things undone and ignored those that we are responsible to and for, God, we seek to repent from our sins, and we hope that your Spirit will empower us to make amends. Let us live from the fullness of your love, knowing that the fullness of your love isn't only found in giving and sharing, but receiving. So help us to accept this love. Help us to open our hearts and our hands to the love that others are giving to us and the love that we need to receive. There are all those other prayers on our hearts and in our minds, God. You know the prayers that we have said out loud and those ones that we have not yet found the words for, but we trust that you already know and that your Spirit intercedes on our behalf. So may we sense your Spirit now and always through Jesus Christ our Lord, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. As the choir gets ready to sing their anthem, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to give to Grace, you can do so in one of the baskets by the doors. Your offerings help to continue the work of the church, and you can also give online at gracedesmoines.org. And if you have one of those connection cards that you would like to fill out, please put that in the basket by the door as well.
Prophecies will
Thank you, choir. We're going to begin a bit of volunteer recognition now to thank folks that have been involved in the work of the church, especially over the past few years. And it's been a while since we've had an opportunity to recognize a number of folks together. So, Michael, come on up.
Good morning. My name is Michael Gukin. I direct the chancel choir here. I should probably explain why we weren't wearing robes today. We decided to take the Summer of Love to the next level. So instead of wearing robes, we decided to wear colorful things to kind of dedicate that. And also, I was thinking through this might be the first time I've ever worn a t-shirt to a church service. Truly, I don't think I've ever done that. So that was something new for me. I'm going to start out this with a quote from Richard Baxter. It says, "Be laborious and diligent in your callings, and if you cheerfully serve God in the labor of your hands with a heavenly and obedient mind, it will be as acceptable to Him as if you have spent all that time in more spiritual exercises." And I think that's a perfect quote to start this out. The chancel choir are volunteers and members of this church who dedicate their time and talents to heighten the services here at Grace. And they spend countless hours digging deeper into their faith, using the power of music. They do this every Wednesday through rehearsals and Sundays as they perform here. I would be remiss not to thank another individual who is so helpful and just phenomenal in what they do. I'd like to thank Ann Girdham for the work that she does, truly. Anne is not only here to support us as she accompanies us with her amazing talents, but she provides amazing music for this service, and I always enjoy hearing her play on the organ. It's something special to me. And she also works a lot in the background. She does a lot of behind the scenes work, doing schedules, working on different committees. She knows so much about this church and has been so helpful for me as I've started my journey here at Grace. So thank you so much, Anne. To spend an hour every Wednesday and Sunday is not always easy, especially in a year like this, especially knowing that I said this morning, especially knowing they had to deal with me. That is something that I applaud them for. But a verse in 1 Peter chapter 4 explains why the members of chancel choir keep coming back. The verse says, "As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace." And we have members up here who share their gifts with us every single week. For me personally, it means so much, and hopefully to you as well. So as a congregation, please let us acknowledge the hard work that these members put in at Grace. Thank you.
And Corrine is going to say a few words now about those folks that volunteer with our education and Sunday school.
Good morning. I'm Corrine Whitkey, Director of Christian Education, and those who have worked in our Christian Ed program for the last couple of years have just been exceptional as we've faced some definite uncertain times and unusual times. And would those volunteers please stand when I say your name? First is Carla Daugherty, who helped with Vacation Bible School, and she's right over there. She's an exceptional organizer. I can let her loose in a closet or a classroom, and she has it organized in no time. Other Vacation Bible School volunteers include Jill Severson, Jane Emery Becker, Alice Guerrero, Deb Pope, Jody Off. And if I am missing anyone, I do apologize. It was not intentional. Our Sunday school volunteers include Debbie Dean, Jill Hillscove, Martha Squire, and there's another one that I'll include in just a bit. And would all of those who help organize our adult Sunday school classes please stand? These classes largely run on their own, and they always have excellent programs. About the only thing I do is order curriculum for them. But they just keep going, and it's an amazing program that we have. Nikki and Maddie Gretkin prepare our worship bags each week. They're just right out there in the narthex, and they keep our youngest members busy during the week or during the church service. Our nursery workers are George Taylor, Lizzie Turner, and Natalie Dean. One of the special things that happens each week is the parking signs that you might see out in the churchyard. Those come in after every service, and it's just this magical thing that happens. And I'm the one that puts them out, but they always get pulled back in, and I'm very appreciative for that. I believe the people who are responsible are usually up in the sound booth, and so I thank them for that. Bob Dean is one who gets a separate shout out, and I believe he is up in the sound booth right now. In addition to being our Christian education chairperson, he's a Sunday school teacher. He helps at Vacation Bible School. He's our resident pun maker, and he's a person who is always there. Since we've been having our Bible study this year, he often gets questions about certain things that we come across that I'm not able to answer. These individuals who are standing have been a foundation of our program. They've shifted plans, were a presence in the lives of so many during these unusual times. They showed the love of Jesus in all that they did, passing their faith on to the next generation, which is the greatest gift and demonstrates the greatest commandment. Thank you for all that you have done to build the faith of others. Let's give them a round of applause.
So a few other volunteers that we wanted to highlight, or that I wanted to highlight for you all. One is John Meacham. John was the treasurer of Grace for a number of years. How many years, John? Lots. Yes. John did a ton of volunteer work in that role, and helping out at meetings, helping out with the finance meeting, helping out with the administrative meeting. And it was during the pandemic that Carolyn Nelson became the next treasurer, and we weren't able to recognize John during a service at that time. But John, thank you very much for all you've done for Grace. And I don't see Carolyn here today, but thank her as well, because she picked up that baton and kept running as our next church treasurer. Another person to thank that's not here but is watching online is Marilyn Reese. Marilyn did a ton of work with the prayer shawl and quilting over the years. She's had to take a bit of a step back from that due to some health issues, but Marilyn, thank you very much for all that you've done and continue to do to support the church as well. Just to name off some other areas that we've got folks volunteering, we have our ushers. Today it was Jenny Joint. We've got greeters. We have our AV folks. So Tim, thank you very much. I know Jacob's up there as well. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. The Hoffmans, they're not here today, but they help a ton in that booth as well. There is someone volunteering in the office right now, if you didn't know. We've got volunteers in the office on Sunday mornings before the service and during the service to help out. We've got folks driving the bus. So Rod, thank you for all the extra trips that you're doing with the bus right now. Folks that are volunteering with the free clinic. Y'all are amazing. And folks that volunteer with the meal, well done. And Mike, if you have not been to the free clinic on a night where Mike has cooked, you are missing out. Because he can throw together food and just make something, and it is miraculous and tasty. So thank you for sharing those gifts with the free clinic and being with the folks, and for everybody that makes that happen. Thank you to all of the UMW, United Women in Faith folks that help with hospitality and missions around the church, especially the hospitality that is given when we have funerals, with Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. If you didn't know, once a month we host a legal clinic for immigrants and migrants and refugees hoping to find their way through those processes in the state. And we've got volunteers here at the church that help to put that together. There are the folks that volunteer to make the prayer shawls. The ones that the seniors wore last week were all handmade by folks that volunteered to do that here at the church. We've had a ton of parents step up to lead the youth group this spring now that Nathan and Patty have retired, and we're looking for our next youth directors, and the parents have just taken the ball and are running with it and have the youth work trip planned for the summer and have done great work with that. Are there any volunteer places or folks that I have forgotten? Because if I did, I am terrified, so I really need you to... we don't want to forget. Thank you for all that you do with Amos and for being there, and for Brad Titus as well. He's helped a lot with Amos over the years. Are there others that we want to lift up and celebrate? Yeah. Thank you for the screens again. Yeah. Okay. Did we got everybody then, right? Okay. Well, thank you all for the ways that you help around the church and for the ways that we live out our faith. And to bring the service to a close and to sing our commitment, we'll now rise in body or in spirit and join in singing hymn 399, Take My Life and Let It Be, in the red hymnal or on the screen. So as you go into this week, may your life be consecrated to this perfecting love. That means we aren't perfect yet, but we are striving towards that. And by God's grace, this atmosphere of love is with us wherever we go. So may you commit yourself to that practice so that you can love and do what you will. Go in peace. Amen.